Hello everyone, I'm Huibert Mees. Welcome to 901 Woodworking and the start of the build of our CNC machine. I've collected most of the parts here on the table. There's a few missing, but not too many. As you can see, there's a lot of parts involved in a machine like this. It surprised me myself how many parts there actually are. But it's a pretty complicated machine, so there's going to be a lot of pieces. But today, we're going to start building the frame. So, let's get started. Okay, the first step in building the frame is to cut these extrusions to length. Now, two of the extrusions, the long ones, are already at the right length, just the way they come. Designed the thing that way so that I wouldn't have to cut a longer length into pieces. But the crossbars, these two, do need to be cut to length, and they need to be cut to 720 millimeters. The long ones get tapped in the ends because there are plates that get bolted to the ends of these. So these are M8 taps. That's already been done. One of them gets tapped in both ends. The other one is only tapped in one end. So let's take these to the chop saw and cut them to length. All right, well, I've cut the crossbars and I've cut 400 millimeter long legs. We can now start bolting this together. Okay, the main frame is done. I've added the linear rails on the sides, both sides, as well as the lead screws. These are currently not attached to anything, but they will attach to the uprights that form the sides of the gantry when that is completed. I've added a main board and spoil boards, as well as these T-tracks to help me hold down the work pieces with some clamps and that sort of thing. These boards are meant to be sacrificial. I know they're going to get cut up as the machine is used, and they're easily replaceable. They're just some screws on the ends that hold them in place, and when they get too damaged, I can easily replace them with new pieces. I've mounted all of it already onto a cabinet, which is the cabinet that we showed in the design. I've already built that up. It's all completed, and it contains all the electronics and all of the electrical systems that are required. So that completes the Y-axis for the most part. Next, we build up the gantry for the X and the Z axes. So this is the gantry assembly. It's the X and the Z axes put together. It's mostly complete. There's still just a few things left to do on it before it's ready to be installed onto the main frame that we just looked at. The important thing to know here is that you need to make sure that all of these things will run smoothly without any binding. If anything binds, it just means the motors have to do more work and they may not be able to move as smoothly as you need to for your CNC projects. So what I do is I make sure that everything moves back and forth and can slide along these rails after I've tightened everything up smoothly without any binding. Now, it's a little hard to do now because I've also included the ball screws and, in this case, the motor, but you can still move things mostly. But it's hard, and it's hard to tell if there's binding happening here. In this direction, it's a little easier because the motor is not attached, so it moves a little more easily. But what I do is I make sure that all these parts will slide on their guides before the ball screws are installed so that there's no resistance. And in this case, everything moved very nicely, very freely, so I know that there's no binding. The other thing to make sure of is that these rails here are perfectly square with the Z-axis assembly. So when you install this intermediate plate, it has to be absolutely square with these extrusions so that when the tool is placed in its holder, it is perfectly vertical above the workpiece. If this weren't square, the tool would be sitting at an angle and it would be machining the workpiece at an angle. You don't want that, obviously. If you're doing very fine detail work, it probably won't show up, but if you're flattening a board with like a 1-inch or so end mill or flattening bit, then if this tool is not square, then you're going to get scalloping on your workpiece, or you're going to get a sawtooth pattern. So you have to make sure that everything is perfectly square when you're putting these things together so that the tool ends up being perfectly vertical to the workpiece. Okay, let's finish putting this together, and then it's ready to install onto the main frame. Now, one thing I do with these Allen head bolts is I tighten them by hand, because if you don't, there's a tendency to strip. So I do this by hand after I've run them down with the power tools. It makes it easier to install them with the power tools, but the power tools can also strip these out, as I've noticed in the past, unfortunately. Okay, that's the gantry complete. Now we can install it onto the mainframe. Installing the gantry is not difficult, it's just awkward because it is quite heavy. There's a lot of metal in it, and even though the majority of it is aluminum, there's a lot of it, and so it adds up. So if you have a friend who can help you, that would be great. Otherwise, if you're working alone like me, use some wooden blocks to help hold it up. Have some fasteners laying ready for you to install, and then once you have the piece more or less in place, bring your linear bearings up to it, and with it sitting on a wooden block, you can easily rotate it into place and get the first fastener started. Once you've got one side in, do the same to the other side. Once you have one fastener on both sides, you can now lift it up . Then do the same on the other side. Once you have a few fasteners in loose, you can actually move it back and forth to test that it moves freely as well. You can see in this case, it does. And now you can add the rest of the fasteners.